Hey there, Tristan here. We've just wrapped up our most recent life and money conversation on the topic of millennials trying to buy a property at ridiculous prices. Is it worth it? What's going on in the property market in May 2022 and what opportunities await you? And we had a really rich conversation. Most of those in attendance either already owned a home or content renting. In fact, most of them were looking at investment properties. So not just looking for a home, but looking at opportunities to expand. Nonetheless, we still looked at the plight of first home buyers. A lot's going on at the moment. We've just recently had an election with Labor. The opposition is now coming into power with a new set of policies. They have their own focus on how to make housing more affordable. We looked at the affordability of houses themselves. We looked at the macroeconomy, what's going on in the globe. And I thought to highlight some of the key points that we discussed and give you some of the tidbits of insights that we drew from the conversation. So some useful data points that we explored together was this great page by the ABS. Property data is hard to come by because unlike the stock market, it's not charted on a graph all the time. But there are property indexes, and the Australian Bureau of Statistics does a decent job at reporting statistics on how individual properties are going, both by area but also aggregate. What you'll see is that up until the end of 2021, so it's the last quarter of 21, there was an increase of 4.7% and a 23.7% increase over the calendar year in 2021. Obviously, heavily stimulated by government handouts and post-pandemic responses, policy responses. And anyone who was looking for a property last year would have known that prices were going through the roof. The strongest gains year to year were found in Hobart, interestingly enough, also in Canberra, and then also in Melbourne, followed by, and Brisbane, followed by Melbourne, Sydney, and Adelaide. Even the worst performer at 13% was Darwin. Importantly, if we look at the past couple of years, you note that quarter to quarter, prices don't always go up in property. There are down months. And in fact, if we go to a more detailed graph down here, you can see that this is Sydney's price since 2016. You've seen some really negative periods, even 5 or 6 quarters where prices have moved backwards, positive spikes, downward movements, and then obviously the most recent really stellar growth, differences between housing and rental and units, townhouses, these sorts of things. So definitely price movements favoring the houses, but also on the downside, more heavily affecting the houses. So interesting, more volatility with the housing stock than there is with the units. So really rich data across various capital cities. And if you look at how things have gone over the decade, what you see is on aggregate, places like Darwin and Perth have barely moved, only 20% gains over the decade, whereas you have Sydney up the top end with about 118% gains over 10 years. So that's doubling, a bit more than doubling over the course of the last 10 years, with a lot of those gains happening, half of those gains happening just in the past 3 or 4 years, and a lot of them happening leading up to this little pullback. So even though you don't see it always on a graph, there are ways to graph property movements. And as you can see, we're at a bit of a high. So what you often hear people talking about is that the housing market is starting to roll over, just like it was rolling over here. It doesn't happen immediately, and you don't get pullbacks so sharp. But this is aggregate. So when we're talking about aggregate data, but you're looking to buy a single property, your property matters much more than the aggregate, right? So that's a bit of what's happening in the Australian housing market. In terms of what's happening globally, inflation is what's going on. All across the world, there's large numbers of inflation. It's funny that this website uses green to indicate the higher inflation. Inflation is a measure of how expensive things are becoming, how much more expensive they become over time. And governments intend to keep it positive, but no more than 2 or 3%. That's their goal. In fact, it's one of the most important metrics for a government to manage, because when inflation gets out of the can, into the 5, 7, 10, 15, 20, that's when economies start to spiral downhill. And the worst economies, like for example, Turkey, is falling apart economically. A lot of these countries, Russia, Argentina, Brazil, are in a lot of pain economically right now. However, right up near the 10 mark, you've got the UK and the US. So a lot of countries around the world are experiencing extreme inflation. It's nothing to understate. Australia is actually sitting reasonably pretty near the top. However, that's only comparatively. We're already sitting 2.5 times larger than what we should be at 2%. That's our target inflation rate. So ultimately, people's cost of living is going up by more than their income. That means their real wages are dropping. It means there's more of a pinch. Everyone's starting to tighten the belt, and we're going to see more and more of that as the economy worsens. And in my view, we enter into a recession this year. So interestingly, you see nationally, property is starting to curve over. We don't know exactly what the shape will be, but we know that it's coming to a round of some form. And then we have some negative sentiment on the global economy when it comes to inflation. What happens when there's high inflation? Well, the government starts to try and suppress the economy. Hey, slow down. Whoa, 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 whoa. And they do that by increasing interest rate and cutting spending. Now, with a new government, it's likely that we'll see new spending. So we might not get a lot of negative pressure on the market in Australia from a fiscal policy point of view. That's the spending side, but we will get more interest increases. We already saw our first interest increase from the Reserve Bank in Australia for the first time in a decade just the other month, and that will continue, maybe up to 2 or so percent. It's been as low as 0.1%, and it might get up to 2.5 odd percent. So it might be a 2% increase in total over the next year or two. Watch that, because that's going to put downward pressure on rents. On property prices. All these very toppy properties over the past few years are likely going to get affected by that. Now, we looked at a number of other stats. I won't go through all of them in detail, but some of the key points we looked at was how Australia's net migration rate is compared to the rest of the world, and how it's been transitioning over the years. This is 1950 to today, and projections for it to continue to decline in growth. So still growing, more people come to Australia, but more people as a percentage. More specifically, you see what happened during the pandemic. We had negative migration during the pandemic, and that's going to normalize. So in the short term, what you expect is some inflows of people, and that should be some positives. I guess one of the only major positives for the Australian market, other than some government spending, is we're due to have more people come to the country. So what you need to do as a home buyer is look at the bigger picture and realize we're entering a recession. Rates are picking up. There's a lot of reasons for properties to start to curve over and potentially even to retract. However, there is some influx. There's more people coming, and if you look at how much construction has been going on in the housing space, you'll see that. This is that's financing. This is construction of dwellings. Although there was a spike during the lockdowns, levels of construction and completions are still relatively low compared to purchasing of existing. So, with more people coming to the country, we're going to need more construction and completion, and we have more demand for Australian property than there is supply, especially in the capital cities. You won't see that in rural Australia, regional Australia, but you will see that in the capitals. So what were probably the three principles we took out from today? Number one is that affordability is key. These top end of properties are going to get affected more adversely than the mainstay, the more affordable brackets. The second is that capital cityization. In other words, location. Everyone's going to be moving back to occupation hubs. People are going to find they're squeezed out of their existing jobs, and they're going to look for smarter and better paying employment, and that will push them towards the city centers. As well as that, you'll see a lot of locational movements, relocation, I should say, to Byron Bay and the Sunshine Coast, or to different areas around capital cities. People will start to move their way back closer to the middle of town, and you're going to find higher demand on the center of town. As well as that, international investment will be looking at the more primo central property. So we've got affordable property has a premium, closer to capital cities like normal has a premium, but a higher premium than normal. And then the last one is when you're missing out on cash, when your cost of living going up and your salary's not. What do? You go looking for more cash. You look for more income, side hustles, opportunities to make more money, investments that produce an income. What are retirees looking for at the moment? Looking for income. So there's a premium going to be allocated towards properties that rent well, properties that have dual dwellings or granny flats, or the ability to have multiple tenants. There's a lot more of these innovative styles of property that are being developed. If you're into development, or if you're looking to buy something, looking at projects that have smart ways of producing income, not just a 3 or 4% yield, rental yield, maybe 5, 6, 7, even 8%, are the types of projects that are getting more attention now than normal, because there's less expectations of capital gain. So people don't mind their property going sideways if they're going to get some extra cash. They don't like it going back. And so the big question is, will your property go back? Are you looking to buy something that might go back? Look, there's no fixed answers, but if you can take into mind these three criteria of capital city centric, affordability, and strong cash flows, then you stand in good stead. we're yet to see what the new government will do. It'll be interesting to see what they implement. If you're interested in getting some more insight or guidance on specifically what you're looking at and your project, or how changes in inflation, changes in interest rates might affect your own finances, we encourage you to reach out to us and have a chat with us. We'd love to have a sit down and see how we can assist you. At the same token, we run these types of events all the time. We've got some interesting events coming up. This was today's session. Tonight and next Tuesday, that's Thursday the 26th and Tuesday the 31st of May, we'll be running an event on preparing for a recession. Quite practical if you can get along to that. That will be a paid event, $30 per person. Clients of our business are able to come along for free. Just let us know if you're a client and you haven't got a ticket. Then beginning of next month, we'll be discussing how to win your life and career back after kids. So getting back into the workforce and getting balance, both for mums and for dads. Really exciting topic that Harry will run. And in a fortnight's time after that, I'll be having a talk about how to be financially independent. So we've been running our Life and Money events weekly. From June onwards, we're moving them to fortnightly. So they'll be less frequent and double as valuable. That's what we're intending to do. So we look forward to having you along. Thanks for part in the session if you made it. Thank you for watching to the end. Make sure to like and subscribe. And we look forward to seeing you at one of our events soon.